Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to Quincy Carrier Live here. We have a jam-packed, absolutely jam-packed show for you today. We're going to talk about the Browns bridge quarterbacks potentially. We're going to talk about the job security of Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry. We're going to talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers. We are going to talk about it all for this next hour or so. Also, remember, we have the producer, Ian, always keeping an eye on chat to see if you guys have questions that can be answered at the end of this show. So if you have a question, you want to ask it, make sure you ask it during the show so our producer can find this and star your comment so we can circle back to it later. But a ton to talk about today. I haven't talked to you guys since last Monday, and boy, what a different world we live in from last Monday to this Monday. It felt like the Browns were in such a hopeless place just a week ago. Before they played the Pittsburgh Steelers, people were just feeling like there was impending doom leading up to that Steelers game. And thankfully, that game was not doom. It was actually pretty nice. So that was something that changed the tenor of the whole week. But let's get into what went down there. As you see that fantastic, look at that beautiful photograph of Grant Delpit in the snow. Real quick, before I start talking about like the more analytical things and start breaking down this game, can we just have a conversation about how cool those snow games are? And there are a million good arguments for going into a dome, and ultimately the Browns are going to move to a dome. But man, you can't debate how cool that kind of game just looks, how fun it looks. Like the NFL built its image off of having games that look like that, and there's just no way to replicate that indoors. And also, why would you want to replicate that indoors, right? The whole point of building a dome is so that it doesn't snow inside. So, you know, the day that dome goes up will be the last time that we see something like this. And especially with the stadium being on the lake, you get all that lake effect snow. You're not going to really have an opportunity to see the stadium get as crazy as that, right, in the future. So that is something that is going to go away. But let's talk about our first topic of the day. Kevin Stefanski. Last week, we were wondering, because the win-loss record got to a point where you had to start asking questions. Is his job safe? Well, we've gotten a resounding answer from what feels like has to come from the powers that be, that Kevin's job is not just safe, it's super safe. First, we had Ian Rappaport. Well, not Ian Rappaport. Yeah, it was Ian Rappaport, right? Or Adam Schefter, my bad, on ESPN Get Up, talking about Kevin Stefanski and his job security. And he sounded downright incredulous when he was asked about this and brought it up, the fact that like anybody would consider firing Kevin Stefanski. He found to be ludicrous. Right. Then we get the reporting on Thursday Night Football. Albert Breer on the broadcast mentioned that Kevin and Andrew Berry are safe. Also, another nugget that Albert Breer mentioned in his appearance on Thursday Night Football is that the Browns will not be building around Deshaun Watson anymore and will be looking for a quarterback competition. Kind of went under the radar, mainly because we all kind of assumed this is true, but we need confirmation of these things. Why? Because we've lived through too much as Browns fans to just take shit at people's word, right? Like, we're gonna want to make sure that like we're not doing the thing, especially. So we hear those things. Everything that we've heard locally has been adjacent to what we've heard nationally, which tells you that Kevin Stefanski's job is not just safe, it's remarkably safe. Same thing with Andrew Berry. which begs the question. Why is Kevin's job and Andrew Berry's job so remarkably safe, despite the fact that they have a very unsafe win-loss record right now, right? The Browns win-loss record, not a super safe one. And again, this came out before Thursday Night Football. I think that the timing of that is specific and it matters. So what does this say? That all of this talk about his job being safe has come out before all of this and so strongly, despite the win-loss record. I think that's an indication of what happened with Watson and why Watson stayed out there. And I think that's an indication on where this team is going in the future. First part of this, right? If it was the coaching staff's decision to go forward with starting Deshaun Watson after the first 3 games of the season, or the first 5 games of the season, the coaching staff would be held responsible for this win-loss record. But it seems like that's not going to be the case, which indicates to me that around week 3, week 4, week 5, the powers that be got together, Jimmy, Andrew, and Kevin. And again, I am speculating, got together and said to themselves, hey, if this Watson thing is going to be a failure, if we're going to pull the plug on Deshaun Watson, we have to be 1,000% sure that there is nothing that we can squeeze out. We're going to let him play as many games as he can. If that means the win-loss record tanks, it is what it is. We know that is what we're doing. That, to me, feels like part of why Kevin's job is safe, is because the first 8 games of the season aren't really being held against him because he was starting a quarterback that you could argue that he might have wanted to bench much earlier, right? 2, also after that, it also helps that Jameis Winston has been really good, and the numbers have been significantly better with Jameis Winston than they were with Deshaun Watson. So that is also in there. So that's what I think happened with this whole Watson thing. Now, as far as what it means for Watson going forward, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But it seems to me obvious Deshaun Watson's not the de facto starter next year. Like, is there a chance that Deshaun Watson plays and starts a game? Sure. But is Deshaun Watson being viewed as the franchise quarterback of this team? Is he being viewed as somebody who you're not going to bench? I don't think that's the case. I think he is kind of just viewed as another guy on the roster that they're paying. He's going to be here for the next couple of years. I think this year they're going to try to see if they can get anything productive out of him as far as being a backup or anything like that. And if they can't get that, then they will make more drastic steps next year when they only have to deal with him for 1 year. Now, the second part of this that I think that this whole thing tells you, and this is a good thing, seems like Jimmy has some real trust in Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski. Because it's one thing to trust somebody when things are going good. That's easy. It's easy. You can trust anybody when things are going good. The team winning 5 games in a row, you'll trust anybody associated with the team at that point. That's not a test of trust, is when you're having success. A test of trust is when things are hard. Like, things are hard. It's not an easy decision. There's some justification for not trusting these people, and you still decide to go ahead and trust them. That's trust. And the reason that's important, the reason I think that's a good thing at the end of the day, is ownership is only as good as the people they trust to make decisions. There is no such thing as an owner who's going to come in and change the franchise, right? Like, if the Browns got bought by another billionaire, you'd be dealing with the same stuff that you're dealing with Jimmy Haslam. We can tell ourselves that Jimmy Haslam is unique and he's a special personality, but it's really not. We see this happen with every new owner. They go through the same trials that Jimmy has gone through, right? And the reason that is because no matter who owns the team, 90%, 99% of the time, it's going to be somebody who's not qualified to make football decisions. But when you just buy a team and you don't have a ton of experience in the NFL, you don't have people that you trust in the NFL with NFL experience that are qualified. So you end up making a lot of the decisions. And when your owner's making decisions, I don't care who that owner is, all 32 of them, when your owner is making decisions on a day-to-day basis, that's almost universally a bad thing, because your owner is going to be the least qualified person to make these decisions of anybody in that room, because he's not there because of his work experience. He's there because he got money. So if you want ownership to be at a good place, what you really need instead of a new owner is have people in power that make the football decisions, that ownership trust enough to give their own autonomy. In this move, well, not the lack of any move here, the defense of these two in this time tells me that there is real trust built up with Jimmy Haslam, with Andrew Berry, with Kevin Stefanski. And that, I think, is ultimately a good thing for this team, is to have that be the case. We've seen what this franchise looks like when Jimmy does not have trust with those in charge and decides that he has to meddle. It's been awful. The results have been much better since he said, hey, I'm going to trust these guys. And has the results been exactly what we have wanted? No. But we cannot argue that the Browns since 2020 have been a different and more successful franchise than the Browns before 2020. It's undeniable. So that, to me, signals that Jimmy still trusts them, that Jimmy doesn't feel the need to get involved, that Jimmy doesn't feel the need to meddle. I know a lot of people think Jimmy is like meddling behind every decision they don't like behind the scenes, but it's also possible that Andrew Berry just has done some stuff you don't like, right? It doesn't always have to be on Jimmy Haslam. And at the end of the day, that trust is the only way you get good ownership, right? If you look at a team, or you look at ownership and you look at the teams that have went from the perception of bad ownership to good ownership, usually something happens that puts the trust in people who know what they're doing instead of the owner, right? The New Orleans Saints used to deal with this all the time, but then they get Drew Brees, they get Sean Payton. Sean Payton has all these people in charge too. And all of a sudden you got a regime that you trust in New Orleans, and ownership doesn't feel the need to meddle. Then that goes away. We see where New Orleans is now. That is what makes an owner good or bad, right? Like, not their individual decision making. It's if you have somebody in place for that owner to trust. That's what the Steelers family has done. That's what the Ravens family has done. You don't hear about Eric DaCosta making executive decisions. You don't hear about the people who own the Steelers making executive decisions, because they have people in charge that they trust to do the football stuff. And for the most part, they stay out of it. So this is who the Browns trust. It seems like there's some real trust here, because this is the time for trust to be tested. So this is a good thing. This is a good thing. And another reason I think this is a good thing, I kind of touched on it earlier. To me, all of this signals they know what the actual problem is. One of my biggest nightmares for the Cleveland Browns is that all of this happens and they decide, yeah, man, we're still going to run it back like Watson's the franchise quarterback, right? Like you could have, if they fired Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, but decided they're still going to go and start Deshaun Watson. Oh man, that's midnight level, whatever color that is on the warning chart. It's bad. Like, just burn it all down at that point. If they made that decision. What it seems like is happening is that they know it's not coaching. They know that the quarterback position was underwhelming this year, especially for the first 8 weeks. And they're going to focus on improving that position in any way that they can this offseason. What that means is that likely Deshaun Watson especially if he's playing at the level that he did at 2024, not going to be the starter. So that means the Browns are in the search for a bridge. And I want to go through some of the bridge options that the Browns could have and talk about them briefly to see if these guys are sufficient enough bridges. And if you have questions about these guys, please leave it in the chat so we can find it later on, so my producer can go through and bring these questions up at the end of the show. So bridge QB search. Jameis Winston, obviously the first one that comes up. He's the one who has the job right now. I think Jameis is a fine option. Now, with Jameis, gotta understand who he is. You cannot expect more from Jameis than what Jameis is, and less from Jameis than what Jameis is. Because Jameis is going to give you moments where he plays so well that you can convince yourself that, you know what, he was the number 1 overall pick. He's not that old. I mean, when you look at Jameis, it's like he hasn't aged in like 10 years. But you can see Jameis move around. Sometimes when Jameis is on, he's making these throws, and you think to yourself, am I tripping, or is that a franchise quarterback? And if you do that, you're going to disappoint yourself. You're going to set yourself up to be furious at Jameis Winston at some point. There are also games where Jameis Winston will make throws that don't go the way Jameis wants them to go, which results in a lot of interceptions. And you're going to be so mad that you want Jameis Winston bench for like Bailey's app. If we're going to go into the Jameis Winston bridge quarterback experience, we collectively as a fan base need to understand exactly what we're signing up for. There's going to be some fun times. There are going to be some frustrating times. There are going to be some times like Thursday where Jameis Winston can throw you back into a game. There are going to be some times like on Thursday where Jameis Winston can turn over you out of a game. Both those things happened in that game. Jameis came back, made the play. Jameis also was the reason you had to come back and make the play. If you go into it understanding that that is the Jameis Winston experience, that is what you're dealing with, that some weeks you're going to fly higher than you are other weeks, then you good. If you need a primer for this, hey, remember Baker Mayfield? It's a similar ride, except for I would argue Jameis is a little bit more volatile than Baker Mayfield was, right? Because Jameis will go 4 touchdowns and then throw for an interception. Like Jameis will do everything but a little bit more volatile than Baker. It's not a dissimilar experience, but I would argue again, Jameis is a bit more volatile, which is why he's available at this point, and Baker's a starter. That's what you're signing up for. So we if we gonna go this route, which I don't mind, because I am fully aware of what Jameis is, and most importantly, what Jameis isn't, right? Jameis Winston does not throw interceptions because he is making terrible decisions all the time. The reason Jameis Winston, because like when you have that impression, let me go back to that. Because when you have the impression that Jameis Winston throws these interceptions because he just loses his mind and makes a terrible decision, you get the impression that you could fix that. But that's not the problem with Jameis. Jameis isn't making bad decisions when he's throwing most of these interceptions. Don't get me wrong. You'll have a play or two where he throws like a crazy interception. But he's not making bad decisions when he throws most of these interceptions. What happens is that Jameis processes things really well. And since he can process things really well and really quickly, he wants to throw things into what he perceives as open because he's processed it that way. The problem with Jameis is that his arm doesn't always cooperate. Sometimes he's accurate and he gets that ball exactly where it needs to go, and it's beautiful. Sometimes that ball hangs in the air and it goes straight into a safety's hands. It is Jameis Winston's accuracy that is inconsistent, not his decision making that is inconsistent. And when you understand that, you know that, okay, there's only going to be but so much fixing you can do there, right? Like the accuracy is just inconsistent. He's done a better job of eliminating the mental interceptions, right? Where he's just doing crazy stuff. He's done a much better job as he's progressed in his career of getting rid of that stuff. The stuff where Jameis has struggled to get rid of is the inability to be consistently accurate throughout his career. That has been the big difference with Jameis Winston. Usually when I watch him on tape, I'm like, no, them interceptions weren't bad decisions. He just didn't get that ball off like he wanted it to. And that's just how it is. He's a fine bridge, but as long as we understand that and we're not riding up and down every week on that roller coaster, then I think Jameis can work. But we really got I got to do a TED talk at Cleveland Brown Stadium and just let y'all know, hey man, okay, it's gonna get some. There's gonna be some ups. There's gonna be some downs. We just got to accept that. That is the Jameis Winston experience. Sam Darnold is another quarterback who's available, right? And he sounds really interesting this year because he's having a peak season. I would argue that the Sam Darnold experience and the Jameis Winston experience, they're similar, but Sam Darnold throws the interceptions that people think Jameis Winston does. And what I mean by that is when I watch Sam Darnold, he has interceptions, a lot of them, where I'm like, man, what were you even thinking about doing? Like, there's no way that made sense if you process that properly, right? Whereas with Jameis, it's more of a matter of being accurate on a consistent basis, and if he has the talent to fit the windows that he attempts to fit into. Sam Darnold, it's about the processing. You make things really simple for Sam, he can be successful, but the problem is when you make things super simple for a quarterback like that, repeating years of success with that is very difficult because teams tend to catch on very quickly. I don't know if Sam Darnold is progressed enough to where teams won't catch up to him if you try to do the same stuff that next year that he's successful with this year. Daniel Jones is a fun name that gets brought up. I wouldn't bring him in to be your starter, but if you want to have him compete to be the backup or compete in like a three-way quarterback battle, sure. Why not? He's going to be cheap. Joe Flacco, obviously fun. We've experienced the fun with Joe Flacco. But what we have to acknowledge is that Joe Flacco is very old. Like he'll be 41 by 2027. And I brought up 2027 for a very specific reason, but that's the problem with Joe Flacco. Jacoby Brissett is somebody similar to Daniel Jones I would consider as like a backup potentially to Jameis Winston. Like if I'm like, not my perfect world, but if I were to tell you a quarterback room that I would be like, yeah, I'm pretty happy about that going into 2025 or before the draft. If the Browns were able to have Jameis and have Jacoby Brissett both on the roster, combined less than 10 million, I'm all right. I think we're going to be okay, at least, with the quarterback spot, because Jacoby at this point, he's had a disappointing year with the New England Patriots under Alex Van Pelt. But, as a backup, I think he's pretty solid. So if Jameis has to miss a game or Jameis just like tanks with all the interceptions, then you can go ahead and throw Jacoby in there, do a run-focused game plan, and live with that. But those are the veteran bridges. Now, the question when you're talking about bridge quarterbacks is, what in the world are you bridging to, right? And there are a number of answers for that, right? The QB draft of this year, there's been some talk about these quarterbacks. Shedeur Sanders seems like he's going to be the highest quarterback taken. Jalen Milroe, every time like he has a couple of good weeks, he does something incredibly bad that like makes people just not want to draft him altogether. It's to the point to where, as much as I think in like the intangibles about Jalen Milroe, if I were him, I would consider just going back to college and getting a second year under Caleb Lepore, because that might be beneficial. And then we talked about Cam Ward and some of the other prospects. Here's my thing about the quarterback draft this year or next year or the year after. Everybody wants that perfect prospect. But the reality is that the Browns are probably not going to be in position to get a perfect quarterback prospect. They're not going to get Arch Manning. They're not going to stink enough to get Arch Manning. They're not going to stink enough to get Dylan Raiola or DJ Lagway, right? Those guys are going to be top 3 picks in 2027 if Arch Manning stays, which I think he will stay for an extra year. He potentially could stay for 2 extra years. Like, I don't think his college career has even gotten close to started, let alone is at the last year of it by next year. So if you're looking at quarterbacks, I think the key to all of this is try not to be too reactionary to a week of football or to a single season of football, right? I see this every time whenever a quarterback has a bad game. Take him off my board. He stinks. He had a bad game. Hey, man, at the end of the day, when it comes to quarterback prospects, you're not drafting their college stat lines. You're not drafting their college win-loss record. None of those things matter when you draft a player. What you are drafting are traits, right? What you are drafting is individuals. Do you believe in the individual? And do you think that this individual has the traits to be successful? Everything else is under development of whatever team drafts that player. So try not to get too caught up in what this player did this week or what this player did next week. If Shedeur Sanders throws 4 interceptions in the Big 12 championship game, that shouldn't really change where you are with Shedeur Sanders if you're doing this correctly. Because it's not about the win-loss record or the accolades in college. Those aren't the things that you're drafting. You are drafting a person and an athlete. And you got to figure those 2 things out, right? That's the most important. There have been plenty of players who didn't produce in college that became to the NFL and been great. There are plenty of quarterback prospects. I mean, you look at the top quarterbacks that a lot of people picked apart and said, this guy has a flaw here. He can't be successful. Look at this flaw. I mean, hell, look at Bo Nix. I wasn't a fan of Bo Nix coming out of college. I saw nothing but flaws when I looked at Bo Nix, but they figured it out with him. The Browns are in a similar boat with whatever quarterback they draft. They're not going to get into a situation where they get Andrew Luck. They're not going to suck that much. The Browns had probably the worst quarterback play in the last 10 years with Deshaun Watson in 2024. And they still weren't able to get the number 1 overall pick. If they just have mediocre quarterback play for the next 2 years, they're not going to be in position to get the number 1 overall pick in 2027. That's just the outright truth. Or the number 2, or the number 3. And if these prospects are what they look like they could be, nobody's trading those picks unless they're going to do it for a king's ransom. And as much as I would like to spend another king's ransom on quarterback, I feel like there might be cold feet on that whole thing. So if you're the Browns, you can't look at that as your only pathway to getting a quarterback or drafting a quarterback. You got to think about the Jordan Love approach. If you don't know, Jordan Love, drafted by the Green Bay Packers. Nobody really believed in that pick when it happened. It was seen as a reach. He was looked at as a 2nd-round guy. Nobody was talking about Jordan Love as a future franchise guy. It was seen as a super shot in the dark. Turned out it was fine. That's what the Browns have to do. They have to draft somebody that they see the traits, that they feel like is a culture fit, that they can develop, that has the physical tools to become what they want. And they believe in the person mentally enough to be able to pick up what they need to. So they might draft somebody you might not think is a great prospect. They might draft somebody you to go and look at their last year of college and go, hey, man, they weren't productive. That does not matter once the college football season ends. Because all that matters after that is how well do the Browns develop that player. Because plenty of players have been drafted in this league that I thought in college weren't going to be that good and then turned out to be pretty good. That's the approach that the Cleveland Browns have to take. They're not going to have a quarterback fall into their lap. It's not going to be easy. They're going to have to draft somebody who people see as flawed. And they're going to have to develop that somebody. That's going to be how they have to get a quarterback. It's not going to be easy for the Browns to draft a quarterback. It's never been easy for the Browns. But what I will say is that if there's any iteration of the Cleveland Browns that could hit on a quarterback and develop a quarterback and actually draft and get a franchise quarterback, it's probably this one, because there's been enough continuity. And you have a coach in Kevin who's demonstrated that if he gets just a baseline at quarterback, he knows what to do with it. I mean, just look at what he's done with Jacoby, with Joe Flacco, and now Jameis. So that is what the reality is for the Cleveland Browns when it comes to searching for quarterback. A lot of people hoping for an easy answer. The answer isn't going to be easy. They're going to draft the quarterback within the next 3 years that you go, oh, I don't know about that. I didn't love that. It's going to be that, right? There's not going to be universal acclaim. They don't have the number one pick anymore. Or this isn't 2018. They're going to draft somebody you're going to find a little bit polarizing. Maybe it's for their play. Maybe it's their win-loss record. Maybe it's their height. Maybe it's how they celebrate touchdowns. Who knows? Who cares? But somebody's going to be polarizing. And we're going to have to get over that. And too much when I hear people talk about quarterback drafts, they focus on who's perfect. Nobody's going to be a perfect prospect. And if there was one, we're not going to be in position to get the number one overall pick. We're not going to be able to get that guy. Let's talk about something related to this. Because with all the reports about how Kevin Stefanski is off the hook, pretty much, like the pressure is off of Kevin, especially after that win at Pittsburgh. It, to me, feels like now the spotlight goes from being exclusively focused on Kevin Stefanski, and then it turns to Andrew Berry. Because now that we have relative confidence that Kevin's not going to lose his job, that they're not going to hold this win-loss record against him because of the whole Watson thing. Now it's not about Kevin Stefanski and what his record is. Now it's about how Andrew Berry delivers on what's going to be the toughest job of his life and likely the toughest job for a lot of GMs in the NFL, which is how well can you maneuver around the Watson contract being a complete bust. This is the worst case scenario when he signed the contract. We're living in the worst case scenario. It does not get worse than this. Literally, this is the worst case scenario for Deshaun Watson's contract. Now, I know some people are going to want Andrew Berry to be held accountable for the Watson trade. I don't think the Watson trade is something that you need to hold somebody accountable for, because like 12 teams wanted him. It was a sweepstakes for Deshaun Watson. And we're using what we know now in 2024 to be judgmental about making that trade in 2022. But if we're being honest about it, in 2022, what they gave up to get Deshaun Watson made sense given who people thought Deshaun Watson was at the time. Nobody knew, even Houston knew, that Deshaun Watson would tank the rest of his career in the way that he's tanked it, right? That was an unexpected. That I can have some grace for. And the one part of the Deshaun Watson trade that I think does deserve some blame, I don't think has anything to do with Andrew Berry, to be honest with you. And that's the contract that Deshaun Watson got. Like the fully guaranteed contract, I mean, we know who that was. Like, we know what that smells like. The idea to trade for Deshaun Watson in 2022, I can see Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry, and Jimmy Hasselbeck going, yeah, that makes sense. Let's do it. The contract for Deshaun Watson, well, only one man in the organization has the power to greenlight something like that. And it ain't Andrew Berry, and it certainly ain't Kevin Stefanski, right? Like that part's obvious. So the blameworthy part of this whole move is the contract that Watson got. If you had just traded for Deshaun Watson and not given him a new contract, you'd be able to wipe your hands of him clean after this year based on what his old contract was extended to. But that's not the world that we live in. We live in the world where Deshaun Watson got the most guaranteed money of any quarterback up until I believe Joe Burrow got 240. And since I don't blame him for the contract, I'm not going to throw and put the trade into Deshaun Watson himself all on Andrew Berry. It seems very unfair. So what does this mean, right, when it comes to how he has to maneuver out the Watson contract? There's many different ways around this. One, you have to draft really well, right? Like, he has first-round picks for the first time in a few years. He has second-round picks for the first time in a couple. He has a lot of draft picks for the first time in a while. Not just regular draft picks, top 100 draft picks. The Browns weren't in asset accumulation mode, but they have picks now. They have picks in the back end to move up and get more picks. They have a lot of resources to make the team better over the next couple of years that have opened up since the compensation part of the Deshaun Watson trade has taken place. How does he maneuver that? How well does he draft? He's going to be judged for these drafts a lot harsher than he was for the other drafts that happened while you didn't have first round picks, right? And I think he's gotten away with being an average to above average general manager when it comes to drafting because he hasn't had first round picks and he hasn't had second round picks, right? Like, that's just been what the situation was. And given the situation, he's done a good enough job drafting. But in the next few years, he's going to have some first round picks that are going to be judged. He's going to have a second-round pick in Mike Hall that's going to be judged. He's going to have an entire 2022 and 2023 draft that's going to be ready to be judged. And depending on how things shake out, that 2023 draft might look like he hit the jackpot when it comes to day 3 and later. Right? If you look at it, like what Cedric Tillman could be a hit. We know that Martin Emerson is a hit. It might be a DeJuan Jones hit there. Like, you might just have gotten lucky and gotten a lot of good players in those couple of years. But how you spend these first round picks, I mean, that's the difference from bouncing back and being a division contender in a couple of years or sooner, or maintaining mediocrity. There's not going to be a lot of margin for error in the first 3 rounds of the draft for the Cleveland Browns. Like, they got to get at least a starter and a star within their next 6 top 3 round picks. It just has to happen. Free agency is going to be critical because now that you're maneuvering around this Watson contract, who you sign and why you sign somebody is going to be criticized a lot more. If you sign somebody over 30, doesn't make any sense for this team. So, do you make smart signings that pay off in the long term? Jerry Jeudy feels like a smart signing. Do you get more of that? That's going to be another thing that Andrew Berry is going to be judged on, and it's going to be critical. Cap structure. So far, despite all the noise about the Watson contract, where you have to give Andrew Berry a lot of credit for is the fact that the Browns have not lost any of the players that they have marked as future tadpole guys. They've been able to keep pretty much all of the young players that they've wanted to keep. They'll be able to keep Martin Emerson. They were able to keep JOK, Grant Delpit, all the contracts that have come up for extension. David Njoku, the extension there. Jerry Jeudy, the extension there. Like, Jack Conklin, right? Ethan Posick, everybody that they've come across that they have made a decision they want to keep while dealing with this Watson contract, they've been able to keep. A lot of people have predicted that the Browns would have had to sell, had to basically go and have a fire sale by this point. But that's not been the case. They've been able to keep everybody that they've wanted to keep. Obviously, you want that to continue. You're going to have to eat the brunt of that Watson contract sooner than later. It's when you choose to eat that brunt, and what's the sacrifice of eating the brunt of that contract. If you can eat the brunt of that contract and the most it costs you is that you're not able to go crazy in free agency, then you did a great job maneuvering around that contract, right? If you can maneuver around that contract without having to lose any key players, without having to be forced to let some big-time players walk in free agency, then you did a masterful job of working around that contract. That's where that's going to be judged, right? When people talk about, the salary cap, the salary cap, the salary cap. Okay, who do you lose because the salary cap is high for the Browns, right? If that answer to that question is nobody, and it's that contract, then yeah, Andrew Berry's going to be looked at a lot differently, especially if the Browns draft well, they make some savvy free agent signs, and by the 2025 or 2026, they're ready to compete for the playoffs again. People are going to look at that and be like, damn, Cleveland's got a really good GM. He really knows what he's doing. The one area that if I look at like Andrew Berry, like I give him credit for, the trades. He's been very successful with these trades. Right. But even last year, the Dustin Hopkins 7th round pick won, the Amari Cooper trade, and then getting a 3rd round. Like, he's been very successful with trades. I don't really have a question about if he's going to make some savvy trades or not. He's been pretty good at working the trade market. The question is like, okay, what's going to be our hit rate in free agency? And most importantly, with these picks that you're going to get back in the 1st round, what are you going to do with it? Because that's the most shaky part of Andrew Berry's whole resume. All the players that the Browns have identified that they want to keep long-term, none of those guys are Andrew Berry 1st round picks, right? Grant Delpit, JLK are 2nd round picks. Martin Emerson's a 3rd round pick. DeJuan Jones a 4th round pick. And it's great that you could draft guys that you want to extend in those rounds, but you really want to see them hit on a couple of 1st round picks here, right? I think the one thing that Andrew Berry needs as a GM, right, to get people off his back, because a lot of people still are on Andrew Berry, or at least critical of Andrew Berry right now. What he needs is he needs to contribute a player in the draft to this team that is undoubtedly one of their best players. I think JOK before the injury was on his way to becoming that. There were times where he was like the best player on defense. You could argue the same thing about Grant Delpit, but it just hits more when it's an offensive player. So if it's an offensive player, it could work there too. But he really needs a 1st round pick to hit and to be one of the better players on the team. I think if that happens, people will kind of just let it go, right? Whatever their criticism is with Andrew Berry in the drafting. I think that's why these next 2 1st round picks for Andrew Berry are going to be very crucial, because I think that's going to be what a lot of people judge Andrew Berry off of, right? And this to me will be part like of how I look at this offseason and the key for him. Andrew needs to draft well this year and next year. Andrew needs to make some crucial free agency signings this year and next year. And Andrew needs to do a really good job of maneuvering the cap. If he does these things successfully, then the Browns are going to be in a good place, despite all the turmoil that they dealt with during the Watson era. But that's who the spotlight is on now, for me at least. It's on Andrew Berry. Let's talk about the Cavs now. I got to ask this question in chat, and y'all can please give me an answer. I want to look at them at the end of the show. Is the Donovan Mitchell trade the best Cleveland sports trade of all time? That's a tough question to answer, but it certainly is up there with one of the more successful ones, right? When the Cavs traded for Donovan Mitchell, he was a 44.7% shooter. He was a 36% 3-point shooter on 8 attempts. He averaged about 24 points a game, 3 turnovers. Donovan Mitchell right now in his Cleveland Cavalier career, 47.4% from the field, so plus 3%, and 38.2% from three, which is plus 2% on 9 attempts, 27 points a game, 2 turnovers. The Cavs not only traded for a superstar in Donovan Mitchell, which is what he was advertised to be, they traded for a superstar and he over-delivered. He is better than what they expected to get out of Donovan Mitchell. And Donovan Mitchell, since he's been traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers, has played the best basketball of his career. Again, I want to go back to last year where people just thought it was such a done deal that Donovan Mitchell was going to quit on the organization and leave Cleveland to go play for the damn Nets. Like, can we talk about that? Let me detour this video real quick so we could talk about that. Some of y'all really thought he was about to leave the place where he played his best basketball, the place where he's only talked with wide eyes and enthusiasm about the fan base, about the city itself. People just assumed, and this is part of toxic NBA media culture, right? Where if it ain't LA and if it ain't New York and if it ain't Boston, then it don't exist. It ain't good enough, right? Like that's basically how NBA media handles things. They always want your player in your small market to go play for the Knicks, to go play for the Lakers, to go play somewhere in New York, somewhere in LA, even if it's one of them New York or LA teams that don't nobody watch. Like you will tell me right now that just because the Nets are in Brooklyn and the Cavs are in Cleveland, that makes it a better landing spot? Like, are you kidding me? If I was an NBA player, I would want to be in Cleveland more than the Brooklyn Nets or the Los Angeles Clippers. Like James Harden's been over there for I don't know how long, and don't nobody remember he exists anymore. Anyways. People really thought that Donovan Mitchell was super unhappy in Cleveland, despite the fact that he played his best basketball here. But that's besides the point. Donovan Mitchell got to Cleveland. He's playing much better, and he was already a superstar when he got traded for. Like trades like this usually never work out for Cleveland teams. Like they just usually never go our way. But this trade has gone our way. So much so that it has me asking, is this the best trade of all time for a Cleveland sports team? Look at Donovan Mitchell's 2024 stats so far, right? 24.4 points a game, but he's on incredible efficiency of 47%, and then 41% from three, and then 2 turnovers, 7.9 fourth quarter points a game. And I believe my producer threw in there that he's not even playing as many fourth quarter minutes as he did last year, and he's still averaging 8 points in the fourth quarter. I mean, you don't even got to look at the stats to know that Donovan Mitchell has been a dominant force for the Cleveland Cavaliers since he's been traded here. Just pay attention to the games, any of them. It's obvious. So shout out to Donovan Mitchell, playing very well. The question is this the best trade a Cleveland sports team has ever made? It's a difficult one to get to. Right? Because there are some trades the Cavs made that you would throw in there, right? Maybe the 2016 trade to get Iman Shumpert and J.R. Smith here, because that did lead to a championship. You can also use the same argument with Kevin Love, but I would argue that Kevin Love wasn't as vital to that championship as Donovan Mitchell would be to like a Eastern Conference final run. Like, I don't think that those are comparable. The only trade that I could think of that's competitive with the Donovan Mitchell trade for the Cleveland Cavaliers is when they traded, I believe, Baron Davis. Was it B. Diddy? I believe it was B. Diddy that they traded and somehow got Kyrie Irving out of it. That is the only trade I can think of that's even close to competitive with this. And Donovan Mitchell, I think, is better than what Kyrie Irving was when he was here. Like, Kyrie Irving was incredible, no doubt, but Kyrie Irving could never carry a team like Donovan Mitchell is carrying a team right now. Like that's been the beef with Kyrie. Kyrie's always been a really good sidekick, like the best sidekick you can have, but not somebody who can anchor a team. Like, we've seen what those teams look like when Kyrie was anchoring. You won like 25 games with it. Donovan Mitchell's a little bit different, but Kyrie was a crucial piece to winning this franchise's only championship. That's the only trade I can think of in basketball that comes close. Football wise, there's no trade that comes close. It's honestly ironic because the Watson trade happened around the same time. And LOL, right? Like you talk about balance. This is the best Cleveland sports trade. And I mean, we'll talk about the Deshaun Watson channel on the other channel. But the only other trades that have been brought up to me that could compete are baseball trades, right? Like that's the only thing here. I have a list up from MLB.com. They say Andrew Miller trade, the Corey Kluber trade, right? You traded Jake Westbrook, who was a Cy Young winner, for Corey Kluber, who I believe became a Cy Young winner. The Lindor trade is up there too, but you got to the World Series. But baseball is just so different. One player is not going to carry you to a World Series. But you also got Carlos Carrasco in that same trade. So maybe, no, that's the Carrasco. My bad. I had that backwards. Lindor and Carrasco got traded, and you got Ahmed Rosario, Adrian Gimenez, Josh Wolf, and Isaiah Green. The Cliff Lee trade, where we gave up Luis Francisco. I'm out my depth here. Cliff Lee and got Carlos Carrasco, Jason Donald, Jason Knapp, Lou Marson. I don't know. I don't compete with best sports trade of all time. The CC trade, not there. Let's go ahead. Go to the top two. Sandy Alomar trade, where you got Sandy Alomar, Carlos Baerga. Yeah, maybe. And then the one that I've seen brought up is the Bartolo Colon trade, where the Guardians gave up Bartolo and Tim Drew and got back a Cy Young Award winner, Brandon Phillips, who I think they ended up giving up to Cincinnati for whatever reason, Grady Sizemore. I would say it's really between the Kyrie trade and this one, right? Because the Kyrie trade cost you significantly less than trading for Donovan Mitchell. And it was a more wild outcome. But I'm just glad that Donovan Mitchell has lived up to that trade, that we're not ever going to really have the conversation about whether it was good or not. Remember last year, people would want to talk about, well, Lauri Markkanen, he would have the same impact with the guy. Nah, man, you're not going to tell me Lauri Markkanen would be just as good as having Donovan Mitchell right now. Like, Donovan Mitchell is a legitimate, you can build a team around him, anchorable superstar for this Cleveland Cavaliers team. And that is something that the Cavs have had rarely outside of LeBron James. I mean, like, honestly, you look at all the Cavs teams that were pretty good before LeBron James, they weren't teams anchored by a star player. They were usually teams that were anchored by being a really good unit, right? The Cavs teams of the 90s, you go all the way back to the 70s Cavs teams. Like, they were usually just strong units, but Donovan Mitchell is the one player outside of LeBron James that you could point to and say, hey, no, you could build a really good basketball team just off the premise of we got Donovan Mitchell. Obviously, there's a lot around Donovan. It's a really strong unit around Donovan, but there's no question who the best player is on this Cavs team. And for teams without LeBron James in this franchise's history, that's been a little bit difficult to come by. And that's what I think makes the difference in this Donovan Mitchell trade. It makes this Donovan Mitchell trade a contender for being one of the best trades of all time in Cleveland sports history, is because you got an anchorable all-star. Well, not an all-star, superstar, which just so rarely ever happens at the age that Donovan Mitchell got traded for too, right? Like, Donovan Mitchell still is pretty young. Usually when you get a dude like that, it's like KD at the end of his career or something like that. But it's a question worth asking. Would love to hear your answers. Speaking of answers, do we have any questions to pop up for the last 5 minutes of the show? Did we get anything? Yes, we did. Besides QB, what do you think is the biggest need on the roster? I think you need to retool the offensive line, specifically in the interior. I know that a lot of attention is going to the tackle positions, but I think this draft is not great for fixing that. And I think if you have a proper pocket quarterback, you can get around some of your issues at tackle. So I would focus on the interior of the offensive line with this draft, because that's where this draft is going to have the best players on the offensive line. And then use 2026 to focus on the left tackle and right tackle positions if DeJuan Jones does not come back strong from his injury. Yeah, another one. Can I throw out a homer name, Will Howard? I don't know, man. I don't watch Will Howard and think he's going to be great on Sundays, but who knows? Maybe there's something there that I'm not seeing. This season has humbled me in a way to where I'm just willing to accept that I could be very wrong on whatever, right? So yeah, is Will Howard a possibility? Sure. I don't necessarily believe in him, but we'll see how the draft process treats him. And how he does, and if he does like Senior Bowl or NFLPA Bowl or whatever it is. But yeah, I mean, if he wins a national championship, I think that'll put a lot more profile on his name, and this is a conversation that's going to be taken a lot more seriously. Q, knowing what we know now, what do we think do with the offensive line in the offseason? I think it's about drafting guys who either will play in year one on the offensive line or will play in year two in the offensive line. I don't know what the future with Joe Bitonio is. He might retire, but the plan to replace Joe Bitonio is Zach Zinter, and we haven't seen enough of Zach Zinter to know if that's going to work out or not. If I'm the Browns, I think you need to go ahead and look at center, depending on what you feel internally about Luke Whippler. And then you also need to internally look at guard, because I think it's obvious that Wyatt Teller probably not going to be here much longer. And not that he's a worthless player. I just think he's a streaky player at guard. And but you probably want to get younger, cheaper at that position, and you can use this draft to do that. So I would focus on the interior, because if I'm the Browns, what I want to bring back is that run game. And the run game lives in the interior of the offensive line, especially with how much the Browns like to pull their guards. By the way, I got to thank today's sponsor of this show. Give me 1 second here to pull up so I could talk to you guys about Core Home Fitness. Core Home Fitness has been awesome for me. Give me 1 second, Ian. I got to pull up the script. Sorry about this, but we will get it going in just a second here. All right. Sorry about that. My bad. I wanted to make sure I had the right stuff in front of me. But Core Home Fitness has recently introduced themselves as the new sponsor for OBR. And I want you guys to look up our friends at Core Home Fitness. You can find them at corehomefitness.com and check them out. An assortment of lifting equipment and especially top-rated adjustable dumbbells by the New York Times and Men's Health. They're also rated a Best Buy customer by Consumer Reports. Check out their videos and other products like the Glute Driver and Fight Master and Crush Your Goals in 2024. They've got a US-based support team. So fast shipping, hassle-free returns, you name it. They know what they're doing. Again, check out Core Home Fitness for ultimate in-home fitness equipment. They have stepped up to sponsor the OBR, and they rock. Shout out to Core Home Fitness. Make sure you check them out if you're looking to get your body right for the new year or for the rest of this year. I know I might have to do a Core Home Fitness challenge and start working out during these games, because I need to get back to my peak form here. Do we have any questions before we head out? Going once, going twice. All right. So that's going to be it for us today. I want to thank everybody for joining us on Quincy Carrier Live. And the party doesn't stop just because I'm leaving. Make sure you check out OBR Weekly with Fred and Barry. And now let's toss to them.